Guys, the morning after the night before, the Golovkin-Kell Brook news has settled in. I did 2 videos on it yesterday. Thanks to everyone who checked those videos out and who subscribed to the channel. I can see there's a few new subscribers who joined off the back of those videos, so welcome and many thanks to everyone. But what I'm going to discuss in this video is the Chris Eubank situation in more depth. And I did a video discussing my thoughts on how the Eubanks had handled this yesterday. So I'm not going to discuss necessarily in too much depth about how I think the Eubanks handled the negotiations in this video. I did that on the last video. What I am going to discuss is where the Eubanks go from here. Now, with regard to why the Eubank-Golovkin fight didn't happen, I guess there's 3 schools of thought. 2 of them which are viable, respectable opinions in my mind, and one of them which is a bit wide of the mark. Some people out there claiming Eddie Hearn had screwed over Eubank. There's some beef there and Hearn decided to screw him over to take a larger cut for himself. I think that's nonsense. Eubank-Golovkin is a bigger fight than Brook-Golovkin. Eubank-Golovkin would have made Hearn more money. If that fight was viable, Hearn would have made it. But let's put that to one side, because as I say, we discussed that in yesterday's videos, and if you want to hear me discuss that, those videos are there for you to check out. The other 2 schools of thought. Number 1, the Eubanks are so eccentric and so confident in their own marketability. They believed they were in a position to make these demands, and they believed that Eddie Hearn would have no option but to bow to their demands. If that's the case, they've taken a sharp wake-up call today, seeing that Eddie Hearn has essentially given them a deadline, stuck to the deadline, and then made another fight against the guy they were looking to match up with. So option 1 is that they did want to fight, and if that is the case, they have learned a bad lesson here, a painful lesson about their own market worth. You know, the rumour is this was a £3 million payday for Eubank Jr. He hasn't got that. He hasn't got that. And Abel Sanchez has said that Kell Brook got the same deal that Eubank Jr. was going to get. So there you are. The rumour is that Eubank Jr. has lost a £3 million payday here. The rumour is he also lost potentially a £1 million payday, certainly £700,000 payday against Billy Joe Saunders due to similar eccentric negotiation techniques. So what I'm getting at is Eubank has lost his 2 biggest paydays by far. Eubank is a guy who, if he'd taken fights that were available to him, could have earned £5 million in his career today, following on from the Golovkin fight. Instead, it leaves you questioning, what is Eubank's biggest ever payday? Has he even ever earned £500,000 for a fight? Let's not forget that first Eubank-Saunders fight was on an undercard. It was on the Fury-Chisora undercard. Has Eubank actually earned £500,000 in a fight? Yet he's rejected fights against Billy Joe Saunders in a rematch for a minimum of $700,000 and against Gennady Golovkin for several million. You know, did he actually want that fight? And has he learned a horrible lesson here? Now, if he has, I do believe Eubank can come back from this. One thing this whole saga has shown is the public demand and marketability Eubank has. You know, it's amazing that we're talking about Eubank after Kell Brook versus Golovkin being made. But myself, like many of the other YouTube channels out there, are fascinated by Eubank. And let me say, even though I've been critical of Chris a number of times, I'm actually a Eubank fan. I really enjoy the hype around him. I really enjoy the press conferences. I really enjoy watching him fight. You know, I think he's a flawed fighter, but a very entertaining fighter. I genuinely consider myself a Chris Eubank Jr. fan, believe it or not. And he can come back from this. You know, let's be honest. Mick Hennessy, he worked with him again after the split. He put him on for the Nick Blackwell fight. Frank Warren, for me, Frank Warren will have no option but to work with Chris Eubank again. Look at Frank Warren and the Furies. Frank Warren and the Furies fell out. They had a public spat. That was quite nasty. That's all been brushed under the carpet now that it suited both of their business needs to have Fury Klitschko on Box Nation. So, yeah, Frank Warren has shown that he's the kind of character who can allow water to go under the bridge. America is certainly an option for Chris Eubank Jr. You know, Al Heyman, although I somewhat question whether the hype that surrounds him here will be to the same extent over there, you know. But most importantly, I think Eddie Hearn is still the best option for Chris Eubank Jr., even after this complete saga. I think if the Eubanks genuinely wanted that Golovkin fight, if they did genuinely want the Golovkin fight, they should now take a good look at themselves and say something like this to the effect of Eddie Hearn. We made a misjudgment. This is a fight against the most feared fighter in the planet. We wanted to make sure our fighter's financial future was secure. We understand we made a slight misjudgment, and we'd like to fight Golovkin after he beats Kell Brook, if he beats Kell Brook. And I think if they adopt that approach, there is no reason that the Eubanks can't come again with Sky, with Matchroom. Let's be honest. Sky Sports pay-per-view is going to be by far the biggest earner for Chris Eubank Jr. in the sport. If he goes over to America and signs with Al Heyman, sure, there's big money over there. Do you think there's going to be the same public interest, as there is over here? We know the history of Chris Eubank Sr. I could have seen that Eubank Golovkin fight doing 500,000 pay-per-views. Do you think 500,000 Americans would put their hand in their pocket to pay for Chris Eubank Jr. over there? I don't think so. I think the money for Chris Eubank is signing with Eddie Hearn. And funnily enough, Eubank Golovkin could actually be a bigger fight, assuming Golovkin beats Kell Brook. Golovkin hasn't fought in the UK before. He's going to be on a massive event on Sky Sports pay-per-view, which is going to be hugely hyped. Golovkin's profile, Golovkin's image is going to be raised substantially from this Kell Brook fight. And I think there is scope that Chris Eubank Jr. Golovkin could happen fairly swiftly after, and that could potentially be a bigger fight at that point than if it happened now. I genuinely believe that if the Eubanks do want that fight, their best bet is to stay with Eddie Hearn. And I think whilst they've perhaps looked a bit Muppet-like with their stance in the negotiations, this Eubank eccentric thing is probably good for image, and is probably good for all of the sort of conversations surrounding the Eubanks. It's this sort of bizarreness about them that creates so much intrigue for my money. So, for me, Eubank has looked like a bit of a mug here. For me, there are questions as to whether Eubank Sr. is having a positive impact on Junior's career. There are questions as to whether Eubank Sr. has single-handedly turned a career that could have been worth £5 million to date into a career that maybe isn't even worth £1 million. Those questions exist in my mind. But the Eubanks are still in a strong position. Hennessy would have them, Warren would have them. Eddie Hearn has already come out and made clear he'd still like to work with them. And the image has risen off the back of this. That Golovkin fight has not gone. If the Eubanks still want the fight, and if they're prepared to fall in line and learn from this, that fight is still there. Now, the alternative point of view, the second school of thought, if you like, is that Chris Eubank Jr. never wanted the fight. Or more appropriately, so I say, Chris Eubank Sr. never wanted this fight. And he was purely using Golovkin's name to generate hype and interest in his son's career. And that is possible. Let's not forget this is the same guy who said his son would go to the Olympics. Let's not forget this is the same guy who was tweeting about the fight Simon Cowell and David Beckham yesterday. The Eubanks do seem to be fairly fame hungry. We've seen Chris Eubank Sr. go on various reality TV shows in a bid to raise his public profile. Let's have it right. But if that was their tactic to raise their profile by calling out this fight, in a sense, they've achieved that, because Eubank's name is going to be everywhere with all the discussion surrounding it. In another sense, this mystique surrounding Eubank about him being an absolute destroyer has perhaps gone. A lot of people out there are starting to believe Eubank has ducked Golovkin. So that needs to be carefully handled. One thing I will say is, even if they don't want the Golovkin fight, they're still in a strong position. Apart from Anthony Joshua, they've got the most marketable fighter in the UK. They've got a fighter who's extremely entertaining to watch. But what I will say is, as someone who has watched every minute of Eubank Jr.'s career in a professional ring, I've watched every round of every fight he's had, I do want to see a bit more from him in terms of the level of opposition. Before the Billy Joe Saunders 1 fight, I criticised him for the lack of learning fights. After the Billy Joe Saunders fight, I suggested he should drop down a level and take those learning fights. And I actually think the fights he's had have been the right sort of level. Blackwell, O'Sullivan, Chudinov, those are the right kind of level, learning fights. They've given him rounds on occasion, they've let him work on a few things, and he has improved. As you know, I still have questions about his defence. Can he block a jab? I still have questions about him dealing with a moving fighter. You know, the opponents he's been in with have been hand-selected for me. They've been British, lower European level guys who are fairly static and are fairly easy to hit. But right now, we know how Eubank looks against those sort of guys. I, for one, don't want to see Chris Eubank versus John Ryder. I'm not saying he's got to jump in with Golovkin, but I'm also saying he shouldn't be jumping in with John Ryder. We've seen what he can do to Blackwell, to Sullivan, to those sort of level of guys. We've seen that he's dominant at that level. But we also know what happened when he stepped up to the top level, where he lost the fight. Let's see something in between. Let's see Chris Eubank Jr. against a genuine top 10 world fighter. That's what I want for him next. The options are still there for him. I don't think it would hurt for them to realise they've maybe slightly misjudged their position on this negotiation. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Where does Chris Eubank Jr. go from here? Will he be back with Warren? Will he be back with Hennessy? Will he stick with Hearn? Will he be off to America? Let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed the discussion, please hit the thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. Leave your comments below. Agree, disagree. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, everyone.